Hello, Internet. I am 55 minutes later than usual today and without Nirmal. If you've seen this show many times before, Nirmal Mehta of AWS and a longtime friend now, he works at AWS, and sometimes they have troubles. Sometimes they have rivals that have troubles that cause them failover troubles. So he's busy today helping customers, and I am left alone to talk about GitHub Universe and the vaporware that I seem to be seeing of all the AI announcements. I spent the last couple of hours actually looking through the keynotes, the first day keynote, and what's going on there, and I'm having a hard time finding a single feature I can use today. So that's not really the reason. I'm not going to go through GitHub announcements because a lot of the ones I care about seem to not be ready. They're either in Copilot internals, or they're things coming soon, or they're enterprise features that I don't actually have access to. And they're going to make me upgrade to Copilot Pro Plus. Like at some point, I feel like, which is $40 a month, which is not $200 a month like a lot of my friends, I guess. I actually pay for Claude Pro or whatever that $200 plan is called, or $100 plan. So I guess it's not the most expensive thing in the world, but it feels like the things that I want to play with, the AI stuff, I'm very interested in what we're taking agents and turning it into, because the more I think in an agent way, the more I think about how you use agents, the more I want them if I'm focused on a repo, I would like to be able to use my command line tool, my VS Code, or their website, or the mobile app, and basically wherever I'm at, as long as I got enough credits, my agents are in the background working on the pull request, working on the issues, testing things. And I'm going to work on some of that today, but I'm going to do it while adding some features to my upcoming GitHub Actions course. And that GitHub Actions course, there's going to be a lot around optimizing builds and tests and caches, and the bulk of the work we all tend to do with code deployments is, around the testing and building, shipping of artifacts. And so that's going to be a significant portion of the first course, which is, I'm going to be calling right now GitHub Actions Pro. And that course, in case you hadn't heard me talk about it 100 times, is over here. Yeah. What's up, Martin? So over on my website at learn.bretfisher.com, this is where we're building a new platform for courses and events, and I'm very excited about it. It is taking a lot more work than I expected, but we're actually moving our website from Ghost, which I've been using for a decade. We're going to be moving the main website over to the Kajabi course platform so that everything is all in one place. The community stuff, the courses, the events, the newsletter, the blog, anything else I want to sell or host there, we're going to put it all in one place. And the first thing is going to be this GitHub Actions. I'm going to call the first one GitHub Actions Pro. Then there's going to be follow-on courses, one specifically around all the AI stuff, though AI is going to be bleeding into everything. But I want the AI course to kind of be more about patterns of how to use AI to do DevOps specifically. And that AI course will sort of use some of the GitHub Copilot features. It'll show off how to use Claude. It'll show off how to use Gemini or other popular frontier models. Whereas like the main GitHub Actions course that I'm building right now, that's really focusing on GitHub features. So it'll be using Copilot, and that one is going to have a significant portion of it talking about Docker builds, Docker caching, Docker images, making artifacts, because that to me is like after you're done testing and automating right before you actually have to deploy things, you should probably be using containers for a lot of your stuff. And that's how I deploy most of my apps. So why not do that? So that course, sign up there for a free discount coupon when it launches. I'm planning on it being this quarter. It was supposed to be last quarter. We got busy with KubeCon and some special events you might have seen over the last month. And now it's back to, we're going to have KubeCon in a couple of weeks, and then it's going to be heads down on the courses again. So one of the things in that course is going to be, let's see, my Docker build, I think. Yeah. So this repo, Docker build workflow, I think that's a command. Is it web? I always forget. View. It's view web. Web. Got it. Instead of typing in the link, I just wanted it to take me there. All right. So if you didn't know about this, this is like my go-to. Look, I think besides the Docker documentation, this is the best way to build all container images on GitHub. Anything you make with a container, I think this repo, I've tried to make this repo the gold standard for taking all the best of the Docker documentation, which you shouldn't skip, but then taking all the best features of GitHub Actions and the way that Docker has excellent GitHub Actions. I think their stuff is the best way to build Docker images out of the box. Like if you have GitHub Actions access and you want to use Docker, this is the way you do it. Like whether you build containers that you don't need Docker for specifically, I think in a lot of ways this is the best way to do it. So there are increasingly advanced scenarios that I've designed these templates for. One of them specifically that's advanced is around using the reusable GitHub Actions workflows, which if you're in an organization and you're using GitHub Actions, you should absolutely be using reusable GitHub Actions. You should probably also be using templates, but reusables in a lot of ways are better than templates because I don't have to repeat myself. Templates allow you to copy a workflow or a repo that you've made templates for in your organization. You're able to copy that out. But then the minute you want to change something or improve something, you've now got dozens of copies. Each one's in every different repo, and updating them all is going to be a nightmare. It's a lot of PR. It's just to, either update the version of a GitHub action you're using or something like that. So reusables allow you to extract out a lot of the functionality, all of the different steps you might have, and the different versions of each GitHub action, put those in a central location, and then other repos just call it. And they just need a few inputs usually that you can create. You can make these custom inputs of different types of text or binary or number or whatever, true, false. You can do all that stuff with the reusables, so that most repos, they have like a very short, let's say 50 line or less YAML file for your builds, including advanced builds, including test plus deployment builds, including test plus deployment plus multi-architecture natively built, not using QEMU, but natively built on individual ARM and AMD runners. And then also with all the proper labeling, caching, and then you can do all that from all your repos without having to worry about the versions or doing GitHub action updates on a whole lot of things, you would basically have a single GitHub repo that stores all the complexity of this reusable GitHub action. I've had this for years here, at least 2 years. I think it's probably more like 3 at least at this point, but I've revised it a couple of times. And this particular one, 230 lines, probably half comments or at least a third comments. And this takes all of the best of Docker's GitHub Actions that they have great documentation on. Thank you, Crazy Max. Such good documentation, great workflows, but there's a lot to them in order to really get the advantage of all of them. And a lot of it is repetitive. A lot of it is stuff that you just kind of want. You want labels. You want multi-architecture if you can do it. If you're on Linux, why not build for at least ARM and AMD? I mean, you probably got a Mac developer somewhere. You've probably got servers running Intel and some other, and ideally you're probably testing ARM servers because those are so much better and cheaper. In a lot of cases, ARM is 50%, 40% cheaper. So you need multi-arch. You need to thoroughly test this build, so you need it stored in maybe more than one registry. You maybe need it to have multiple tags, maybe date-based tags or symver tags, plus also name-based tags for humans. You probably want to update latest as a convenience for your developers, though you don't want to deploy latest, but you might want a latest tagged image just for convenience of running locally or easy use for your developers. I always do that as a convenience for devs. And we may not use the word latest. We might use like dev or main or something like that, but we'll use a common tag that's constantly updated with the latest out of a branch. And we do all sorts of stuff. Well, that all can happen in a GitHub. You can decide that once for the team or the entire organization and put that all in this. And then you can go and of that 230 lines, we can go to templates and see to just call it, granted, 2/3 documentation, but let's see, it's like, if you took out all the documentation, I think this is 20 lines and it's super basic. And then you only add these things, it's called with, but it basically is inputs. You have to just add some inputs and those inputs are pretty standard. And I have this really fancy ability for you to tag things with just by uncommenting this. And you can have a date-based tag, or you can have a date plus a tag that is specific to the GitHub Action Run ID, which means you can easily correlate which image was built by which GitHub Action Run, a job run, which I find when troubleshooting, and you've got weird builds, or you're trying to figure out which build broke something, that's pretty useful. So I already have all this stuff. This all has already existed for years. What I'm trying to do now is take my templates and improve them to skip using QEMU. And if you don't know about QEMU, it's when you build an action that you're running on a runner, and that runner by default in GitHub Actions is AMD, Intel AMD x86 64, x64. There's like a dozen different ways you can call it, but the default. If you also want to build it for ARM, which I always do and have done for 4 years, in the past, we didn't have ARM runners. So we had to build with emulation, QEMU. That's also how Docker Desktop can run other architectures on your local machine. Docker Desktop enables QEMU by default. QEMU is a Linux open source project. It's been around a long time, and it does processor emulation from one to another. So you can run Intel on ARM, you can run ARM on Intel, you can run ARM version 6 on Intel and ARM version 8. You can do all the different stuff, all the different ways, and it's very nice technology, but it's emulation, which means there's a performance hit, and sometimes that performance hit can be more than 100%, meaning you can take a 5-minute build or a 2-minute build and use QEMU, and now it's taking 45 minutes. So we don't really want that, and a lot of projects, particularly Like Python's bad at this. Go's pretty good. I don't know about Rust. I haven't tested the Rust, but like QEMU is not great at all things. So we now have ARM runners. We have Intel and ARM runners. Why don't we use both? Well, it turns out that's actually pretty complicated to take two separate machines, build, in theory, identical images. They're not going to be Shahash identical. They're not going to be digest identical because each platform is going to have different binaries that were built. So technically it's a completely different file system, but ideally you have the same versions of things, that everything operates the same way. That's usually the case. It's pretty rare that I actually see a cross-platform unique bug with code I'm deploying. That's like once a year maybe. So I want both of these builds to build separately. They're going to finish at different times, and then I want to bring them together with the metadata. And if you don't know how this works, Docker, when you do multi-platform builds, which every official image has multi-platform support, these images are all built separately. They're separate tarballs. They're separate series of tarballs because each Docker image is layers, and the layers are each one a tarball. So it builds all those up, puts a metadata layer around it to describe the different layers, and it gives you all the platform-specific stuff. And then those have a metadata file above them. I call that the metadata of metadata. And that wraps up all the different images. You might have 5, 8 different platforms. I'm only usually doing 2. I used to do 3 with ARM v7, which is 32-bit, but I don't do that anymore. It's for older Raspberry Pis and most of my stuff. People seem to be able to use the ARM v8 just fine. So I only do 2, but you need to take all those different images that are all being run in parallel across different physical machines. You need to upload them all to an image solution, and then you need to bring them together with another metadata file that will then be loaded up so that when you run Docker run on any platform, when you say Docker run node on Windows versus Mac, chances are it's running a different image. One is typically Intel, one is typically ARM. So it's got to pull the individual tarballs for that platform. But you didn't have to change the name of the command. You didn't have to type Docker run node-arm. That's old school. That's what we did a decade ago. As of 2018, maybe somewhere around 2018, 2019, this has all been fixed, and we have multi-platform support everywhere. So you run the same command, but you get a different image. That's one of the niceties Docker gives us. In order to enable that, you need a single unifying manifest file that when you do a Docker pull or a Docker run, it pulls that manifest down first, checks to match your platform to what the image support list is, and if there's a matching image platform, it then goes and finds that image manifest file, pulls that one down. That one tells you which tarballs to download. Then it goes and downloads all the different tarballs, and when you do a Docker pull, that's what you're seeing happening. And so there's a lot of that going on in the background. So I have a lot of Docker images. I think I've cleaned up lately. So if I do a Docker pull, node 25, before it starts downloading those layers, it's got to pull that first manifest, do my platform matching, download that platform manifest, then do the tarball matching, and then start downloading those tarballs. So that all happened super fast. If we want, we can use a reg. There's multiple tools for this, but bmitches, sudo bmitch has a great tool. I can do, reg control manifest get node 25. And, I should probably do that nicety. Oop. Oh, it's not output JSON. I need to do output JSON. But if I want to do it pretty, I could put it in JSON. But this right here is sort of the main manifest data. And you'll see it's listing all the different platforms. You can see by Arch. If I look for Arch. So it's listing the different architectures. Yep. And I think I can even, on the git command, I can specify platform. So I can say git platform ARM64 node 25. And then that's showing me just, so it first, in the background, it pulled the main manifest, then went and pulled that platform's manifest. And now it's showing me just the specific things for ARM, technically ARM v8. ARM64 is an alias to ARM v8 or vice versa. I think ARM v8's an alias. I'm not sure. But they basically mean the same thing. And then shows that there is a config, and then, which is normal, and then the layers of the actual gzipped tarballs. Shows the size of them. The media type is how we determine that this is, in fact, a image layer based on that media type. You can use artifact support. That's a new thing. Artifact support allows you to have other types of things or anything you want in here. You could have a backup layer type. You could have image layer, like in terms of graphical image, JPEG image type. Like you can make it up as you go along, and there's tools to do that. So back to the point is I've got this repo. What's up, Conrad? Good to see you. All the usual suspects are here. Conrad and Martin, my two all-time best streamer consistency crew. Like, you two kill it. You kill it. I don't have a way to give you claps or stars, but I can do this. I can clap for you. Thank you so much for being here. So what's the change that has to happen? Well, if we switch back over here, so the change really has to happen. And I was actually thinking of trying to use AI for this and exploring the, GitHub Copilot. And because we're at GitHub Universe this week, I'm not there, but GitHub Universe is this week. And I thought, well, maybe I'll explore just doing this in the web browser using nothing but coding agents. The problem is that this is so new. And I'm particular. This is the kind of thing where and I know what I'm doing, and I've written this multiple times, so I'm probably going to be faster doing it myself, sadly, because I'm going to have probably slightly different opinion. I'm very opinionated on these Docker build things. I've been spending a decade focused on them, so I kind of know what I'm doing. So it's kind of like what if you see serious senior programmers talking about that, GitHub or coding agents are challenging at times because they can write this stuff fluently from their brain. They don't have to constantly look at Stack Overflow, so they can be in the zone. And sometimes it actually takes longer to use AI because you've got to get it to do the thing you want to do your way. So in this case, I don't think I have a pull request, but I do have some updated find and update comments. I also need to fix these. So what I'm probably going to do on this one is I'm going to request Copilot to look at this, because this is a major version update of this particular GitHub action. So if you don't know what I'm looking at here, this is Dependabot recommending version updates for my GitHub Actions, which you should always do. You should always put that in your GitHub repo. And I've been wanting, they've been there for a long time, months, way more than 28 days. But I want to implement those, but there are changes, and I don't necessarily care about the details. Like if Peter Evans, who's a prolific GitHub Action creator, if he has changed something about these, I just want to know if they're going to work. I don't believe I have tests that test my GitHub Actions, because those actions would run in GitHub Actions. But there is a linter, and I do have a linter, and I think it runs actually. Oh, see. So yeah, so errors were detected. So yeah, I probably need to look at those errors, but I'm going to ask Copilot to do that. Meanwhile, I'm going to create a new branch. Okay, so I don't have this locally. I was wanting to make sure that I didn't already have something I was working on. A lot of times I work on things and forget to push it, so I don't know what it is. All right. So I'm going to create, we're going to call this native multi-plat. Well, not multi-platinum, but native multi-plat. And then we're going to take the Docker documentation, and my friend Eric Smalling and I, who we did an event recently with ChainGuard. If you didn't know about that, like, get on my newsletter. You got to know about all the things happening. Get on Bret.news. Go to my website over there on that side. Right there. Go there. Get on the newsletter. That's where you find out about special events, special live streams, all that stuff. You guys know. Conrad and Martin know about all that. So I'm basically got to change two GitHub Action files, and we're going to have to get even more fancy with this build architecture. So I'm thinking this is going to be my new default standard. Like, this is basically for a reusable action for all of your repos to use a centralized design. I assume that teams, because these are Linux focused, I'm assuming that teams that are building for Linux are going to want multi-architecture because they probably got a Mac developer or someone on an ARM machine somewhere in their organization. And if not, they should be planning for that. So they should just start building anyway natively for multi-platform. And yeah, so the original version 1.0 I did on 2023. And by the way, you should always fork this. Any of my templates, you should always fork. Don't use my GitHub Actions directly. They're not listed in the marketplace because I don't want to worry about breaking changes. I don't even know that I would ever make a GitHub action. This is not necessarily GitHub action because it's just an action using other actions. So it's a workflow that I've just defined. So it's good as a template, which is how I've built it. And it's considered a public template so that you can use it yourself. And yeah, so on your machine, you can just do this. Create a new repository from this. Make that your reusable repo in your organization or in your personal account. And that's where you can store not just this particular one, but you can store all of your reusable GitHub actions in one place. That's what I do usually, unless it's a huge organization. But the teams I work with, of dozens of people, in that org, we create one repo for all reusable GitHub actions, because that's typically things like linting, image building, certain things that you want to automate, like auto labeling of issues or stuff like that. And then for the things that are maybe only for 3 or 4 repos, you might not create a reusable action for that. So in this, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to clone that locally. And let's get to work. So there's 2 files that have to change here. And they're both, well, actually, we might need to change a file in the templates. So the main thing we care about in the GitHub directory, the workflow called reusable Docker build. This is the meat. This is what I showed you earlier. This is 220 lines or something like that. So what's going to have to change is we may not need to change any of these inputs. All this fancy stuff at the top is all about making choices for you or letting you override the default choices when you call this workflow. And through here, these steps, that's what we're going to have to change. We're going to have to add more steps. And in fact, we're going to need 3 jobs now. I think today it's a single job. Yeah, this thing is a single job. So we're going to need to create 3 jobs. And what that looks like is something we actually did recently that trying to think if it's in, I think it's in the silent rebuilds directory repo. And it might be, oh, you know what? No, it's over here. It's in Mastodon. So Eric and I worked on this. Yeah, 155. So the way this file works is there are 3 main jobs, and it's actually just 2 jobs, but one of them technically runs twice. If you know what a matrix is in GitHub Actions, a matrix is a set of parameters that you give, an array of parameters that it will run the job again for each parameter. So if you want to break up your tests, which I've used this before, if you have 150 tests or 1,000 tests or 10,000 tests, and you need to break those up so that they're not all running on the same machine and they take forever, if your particular testing framework allows you, you can select different groups of tests. I know a lot of testing platforms allow you to you group them all together, different types of tests, unit tests, all that kind of stuff, and then you can break those out into as many smaller blocks as you want. Even fancier testing frameworks will do this automatically, and you can specify here the different. If you have different groups of tests, you can specify this list, and then it will run that set of tests on different jobs and bring it all together at the end so that it feels and looks like one job, but in the background, it's all parallelized and it goes much faster. In this case, what we're going to do is we're saying, I want the matrix to be different platforms, and it's going to use a different runner for each one of these. And it's going to run the same steps on a different runner. One runner will be ARM, one runner will be AMD. And then, because we're running those separately, we need a third. This is technically a third job, but it looks like in the list it's only the second job. It's going to merge. It's going to take artifacts, GitHub Actions artifacts at the end that are uploaded, and bring that metadata together to create the single unifying metadata file you need, and then pushes that up at the same time. So we got this working, and then I need to fit that into our existing workflow and update it. So really, I'm going to switch back over here. And on this one, I have runs on Ubuntu latest, but we need a strategy. We need to add the strategy here. And so now this image will run twice. And I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure if that'll work actually, because now that we're going to have 2 different, well, maybe not. Well, we probably won't have 2 different GHA runs. We'll see if that works or not. I'm not sure how outputs of a single value actually work when there is a matrix. So we'll have to figure that one out. Let me look at permissions real quick. Okay, we have read package write. Yep, that's what we need. Okay. And then this, I'm just copying and pasting from my previous work. The first step, instead of setting up QEMU, now needs to be this little script. And let's put a line in there. So the prepare is essentially taking setting up environment variables so later we can use these to pre-fill which platform we're on. So we need to be able to communicate into certain areas of this job that it's running on an ARM or an AMD runner. So we're going to pull the platform into an environment variable and then do stuff with that later. We technically don't need QEMU for this, but I'm going to leave that step here. Actually, maybe we could just comment out and see what happens. Yeah, we'll come that out, see if it... I don't think it needs it, but I'm not ready to delete it yet. We definitely need to set up BuildX. We definitely need to log into our wherever we're going to push the image. We need to set up metadata. And, yeah. Okay, so yeah, a little bit. This is gonna have to actually change. I'm just realizing. So originally, how this is built is when you call this, you tell it a list of the architectures you want Docker to build with QEMU. So very up at the top here, we have platforms. So this input is defined so that you can just give a string, and it will parse that. This is Docker parsing it. Docker will parse it and set up QEMU to build each one of these images, but it's all running on the same runner. So what we want to do is migrate from this to, it's a GitHub action matrix of platforms that you define when you call this. So platforms to build for, the problem is, yeah, this is where I'm like, okay, I could see how, like if someone needs to build for ARM v7, they're going to have to use QEMU. So it's going to get pretty fancy if I have one workflow that both allows you to choose the hardware platform of the runner and also the QEMU platforms that it will emulate. That like we could technically create a workflow that does both of those so that you could support all three of these, ARM64, ARM v7, AMD 64, but because there's no physical platform to be using on GitHub Action runners, there's no way to use v7, so we have to use that with QEMU. So I'm going to actually, now that I think about it, I'm going to leave this as separate examples because I think they're still both valuable if you need to build i386 or I don't know, mainframe or something. You can still do all that with QEMU. There's really only the two platforms that we're focused on here. GitHub Actions does also support other runners. Of course, you can run the runner yourself, but you can also run on Windows and Mac OS. But neither one of those platforms really build Linux Docker images, so we're just focused on Linux here. And Mac doesn't even technically run Docker builds natively. Like it still has to run them in Linux because Mac doesn't yet have a Docker image that's native to Mac, although that might be changing soon. Based on this year's container native feature in Apple's, which I don't know that anybody's actually using that yet, but actually I think that was last year's OS release that had that. I can't remember. I don't remember which major Mac OS version had the new images feature, but the new container image or container feature, whatever you want to call it. All right, so we're gonna need to change this, and so it's only gonna be Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think, Conrad, most people are like, unless you're a hobbyist and you're interested in ARM v7, you're going to be interested in, maybe I should call this native. Well, like maybe to have two reusables and one that's a slightly different variant. So the question is, how do I change this so that you can turn off one or the other? So I wonder, I mean, if Matrix only runs with one in the list, I'm assuming it'll still run, even though there maybe is only one platform listed. So I'm asking ChatGPT. Or we could ask Copilot. Let's see. Did they have codecs? No. Can I use a GitHub action reusable workflow input to generate a job matrix? Let's see if it does that. So yeah, we need to define the input over here. So we'll worry about that in a second. So that's going to have to change. And then down here, under this, right here, we don't want to tell Docker build and push to use platforms. What we want is to use, I believe, oh no, we need to go under Mastodon. I believe, yeah, we need matrix platform. So we need that. And I think the rest work. Cache from GHA, max, tags, yep. Labels, provenance, SBOM. Ooh, outputs. Okay, so I need to change the out. I need to add a line. Yeah, Apple introduced container CLI in Tahoe. Yeah. So, okay, containers did work, Martin said. Yeah. I mean, I'd be super more excited about macOS containers if it was actually building images. Like we have, people keep asking, people have asked for a decade. We have Linux containers. When we say containers, we mean, the Docker way. We have Linux containers, we have Windows containers. Why don't we have macOS containers? And it's simply because Mac team hasn't created a standard for how you run a container natively on Mac. You still, and until they do, we're going to always have to run Linux containers on Mac. I really wish that wasn't true. I really wish that, Mac had allowed the ability for us to run containers natively if you installed Xcode or something, or their custom tool. I can see why they would want to enable it for everyone, because that level of abstraction might allow like hackers to get around the certificate requirements that all Mac apps have to be signed, and if not, you get a warning and you have to get through all these menus to be able to do that. So I can see why Mac would not want that as an attack vector. But also, like, containers tend to only have access to themselves, so it would have, there would have to be like root privileges of something, some kind, or some way. They could do it. They could totally make it work. I mean, Windows made it work. Linux made it work. They could totally make it work. They just haven't. So when the container feature was announced, built into Mac OS, and it simply just ran a mini Linux VM, like, we've done that. Like, everyone's done that. We have a dozen tools that can do that. Native, if native was faster by some magical thing, then great. But I haven't seen that yet. Yeah, and an ultra fast micro VM. So I haven't really looked, but I haven't seen anybody that's actually done like performance metrics comparing like running SQL database queries inside of the Docker desktop versus Mac OS native. So until I see that, and then if the SDK allows it, like, Docker desktop would probably accept this as like one of the ways to do that. And as far as I know, in Docker desktop today, there is a setting for using Apple virtualization, but that is not the same thing as far as I know. Apple virtualization framework has been around for a long time. It allows you to use Rosetta for emulation, but I don't know that means it's, like, in the past, it's not any better, or it might even be worse than Docker's own VM. So I'm waiting. I'm optimistic, but waiting for something to actually be worth looking into. I think they made a big splash. Everybody was excited when they announced the feature at Apple WWDC, but since then I haven't heard any Docker captains or anyone else talking about it. So, all right. So in here, I think this is all fine, but I do need to add a line. So push by digest. Image push by digest true. So we have to push. Previously, pushing was an option. Maybe you're just doing this for builds for internal testing. But in order to have a multi-platform image, you'd have to push them because they're on two different jobs. So you'd have to push them before you could. Yeah, so I could. Okay, so this is more. So you'd have. Yeah, so we're just gonna have to change this. So we're gonna get rid of this inputs push. Oops. So we're gonna have to get rid of the push option. And we're going to have to assume that you're pushing. You can technically push the Docker Hub or anything, but we are logging in. Yeah, so push is always going to be true. It's a question of where you're going to push. So you can, in the inputs, you can still select whether you want to push the Docker Hub to GHCR or both. So that will work. And then we're all ringing until it can run kind. Yeah. I mean, it sounds like, it would basically be an experience for like Lima and Nerd Control. Like that seems like the most comparable way since they're CLI only. But if it became like, I just don't imagine it would ever, it's probably in the background using the Apple virtualization framework. So it's one of those things where it's like, if all these things are just creating their own mini VMs, then the only way the Mac one could be faster is if they somehow either had internal SDK that they didn't provide that had enhanced performance benefits. I don't see Docker ever using Apple's built-in container runtime. I would see that Docker chooses to run the official runtimes. And, you know, they're going to, and if Apple's is different, like Docker wants to probably be in control of their entire stack. So I would assume that Docker's always going to opt for just electing to use the SDK, the Apple virtualization framework. And so if Apple's official container runtime solution also uses the Apple virtualization framework, the thing that I expect actually to happen is that Docker Desktop is still the premium experience. It gives you all the advanced features. You get the multi-networks and, you know, Swarm support and all, you know, Compose support and all that. And if you just need to do something that's a simple container run, you could just use the built-in. But that if they're both using the virtualization framework, to me, the advantage for the rest of us is that Apple would put more work into the virtualization framework, because today Docker Desktop has released a different, they didn't do it today, but like as of today, Docker Desktop doesn't use Apple virtualization framework by default, because they claim their specialized new, like new is in the last year, VMM is faster. I believe that's part of that's due to Apple virtualization framework bugs and edge case issues. So my hope is if Apple's using their own SDK to do their own work, then they will make the SDK better so that Docker Desktop can get better and Orb Stack can be better and Nerd Control can be better and Rancher Desktop can be better. Like, that's what I care about. I just don't know that everybody's going to switch to a Apple managed containerd alternative or cryo alternative. I don't think. So yeah, Docker uses containerd, but underneath containerd is run C. So and so there's multiple tools that are all built in. So there's Docker CLI that talks to Docker Engine talks to Docker containerd talks to run C. So there's this whole stack of things that work well together and they're standards based. So I don't know how much different. I think the Apple stack is different. I don't know if they're using run C. Cryo doesn't use run C, but Cryo and containerd are the two options we all know and love. So if Apple's choosing to do something different in their stack to run different tooling, then now we have this third option, and it's not as known, it's not as standardized probably, it's not as feature rich, especially compared to containerd, which is very feature rich. So I would need someone to just convince me. I'm skeptical that something that Apple built that's a neat little toy at this point, maybe they're using it internally for their own stuff. Maybe it's them on their way to actually having a Mac OS container. Maybe this is the first step, and then they're going to announce eventually that they have now worked with Docker. I should find out. I should see if I can find out from someone at Docker if that's happening. Probably an NDA issue, but that would be cool, because then we could have Mac OS containers. That would be awesome, so that I don't have to run all my Mac OS tooling that I love to run in containers. I don't have to run it through Linux. I can just build my Go binaries for Mac like I do today, but it's encapsulated in a container, so I don't have to use Homebrew, which already uses container images as artifacts, which is crazy. Homebrew downloads all these things that don't run in containers, but it downloads it as artifacts through Docker, essentially a Docker pull. It doesn't use Docker, but it pulls from GitHub Container Registry the artifacts that run all the brew stuff on a Mac. So that we're like one step away from that stuff also being encapsulated, not in some subdirectory down into Homebrew, but like they're all becoming images. Like, that would be so sweet. It would make the homebrew's life probably so much better on Mac. It would also break some things, and some things probably wouldn't work, and we wouldn't probably have GUI support. But it would be cool. It would basically be what Mac is, or Apple. Sorry, this is basically like would one up Windows, because I feel like sometimes Windows between WSL 2 and native Windows support, it is in some ways a sweeter place to be for developers than Mac right now, because it supports all those different scenarios natively. All right, so I'm going to have to move these PR things. I think I'm going to have to move those down, and we're going to create a new job. But first, in our very long-lasting stream about this particular thing, we're going to have to export the digest. So each runner is going to export the digest for its specific platform image. And then we're going to add a new job. Oh, shoot, and I got to upload. I got to export, and then I got to upload. So these are 2 extra steps that have to happen. And then I have this job that I built over here. So this is technically the second job. And this one only needs to run on whatever machine we want. So Ubuntu later, they can run wherever we want. Ubuntu, it can run on ARM. And it needs build image. Is this one called build image? This one's called build image, yeah. So this final job basically brings in, it downloads the digest from the other jobs. It logs in the GitHub container registry, which we probably need to change that. And then, so we're going to need to copy and paste that because it's a new job. So we're gonna copy and paste the Docker Hub, this stuff right here. Ooh. Using gRPC Swift for container agents and Apple containerization. Yeah. Yeah, so maybe rather than Lima, like maybe we could get to a nerd control, the point where like, yeah, nerd control and all the other tools just support it as a different runtime, and then you wouldn't necessarily need, if you're going to like use Finch, like, so Finch manages, the Finch project today manages running, although actually Finch, now that I think about it, is very focused on what AWS uses, and they wouldn't use that. So maybe not Finch, but like the Lima plus nerd control plus containerd trilogy, if we could swap out containerd and just use the native tools, and then you need less to manage, like maybe that's a simpler option. I don't know, but it's good to see the progress. It's glad that you two are staying up on it. I'm learning some stuff, especially that compose spec. That's always exciting. I mean, to be honest, like trying to get someone learning containers, like I've always struggled in my Docker course, because who wants to spend the first hour or two of a course installing the tooling so that you can take the course? Like, it's just not great. So I've always tried to figure out, how can I make this simpler? And so today, still in Docker Mastery, like you use Docker's web-based play with Docker. You use that at the beginning because I just simply think that's a better out-of-the-box experience for the first few videos before I make you install Docker Desktop. And Docker Desktop is heavy, and it doesn't always work. If you've got a misbehaving Windows machine, it can break very easily at the beginning. And like people have issues and they get mad in my course because it doesn't work. And I don't, I'm sorry, you got an old Windows machine or your updates are broken or Windows tends to be the sore spot. Like Macs, it just works. But, all right, so I'm going to run this because I don't know what's going to break. There's a lot here. I've got a lot here. And while we're at it, I actually want to go back up here and look and see what. Yes, the usual, can I use a GitHub Action reusable workflow input to generate a matrix array, a job matrix array? Yes, minimal use example. The on workflow call, yeah. Jobs build. Matrix from, okay, so I just do matrix from JSON inputs matrix, yeah. So that's what I need to put. Calling workflow on push jobs uses with matrix. Okay. Yeah, this is the format I want. This right here. So yeah, so we're gonna do that. That's handy. Thank you, GPT-5. So we're actually gonna call it inputs platform. And then up at inputs, we need to just make sure the format is correct. Platforms. So it's a string, but it has to be a JSON array. Yeah. Oh, notes and gotchas. Inputs on workflow call don't support array object types natively to send valid JSON strings and use from JSON to parse them. Matrix must be an object. Okay. I'm actually curious too, like the Docker, I don't quite understand actually how this matrix works, because when you look at the runs on, like this matrix platform should be the format for runs on is Ubuntu latest, and then for the other ones, for the ARM ones, I'm trying to think, is it listed here? Yeah, it's not. It's like Ubuntu ARM 64, I think. And then for Docker, it expects the format to be Linux/ARM 64. So I don't quite understand how that works, but it does. because it translates it. Maybe they're just aliases. Maybe it's an alias in the background that just happens to work. So down here at platforms, so we're going to have to make sure the input looks like a JSON, single quote, double quote, like that. And so we're going to have to go into okay, this calls the reusable. So we're going to have to specify a platform and then an array. Yeah, like that. And then, yeah. I think that'll work. Okay, so I think we're about ready to commit and run. I think, yeah, that's done. That was, I think, the biggest issue. Although the pasting, what I've pasted in for this job is maybe needs a slight adjustment. That's all fine. And then this merge one, it's probably fine. That's probably fine. Oh, this is the image. Yeah, so I need to change this. I need to copy tags and put that down here. Yeah. And then images I need to change as well. So platforms, context, file, target, builder. Oh no, I need to put, this is up here, images. No, okay. Yeah, not to confuse. Okay, this is the Docker meta, not to confuse. Yeah, we need this. Grambo Tops. What's up, man? Glad you're here. All right, I don't need that one. I think those work. So I bet you there's going to be a bug in this build where I think I ran into this last time. So if I go look at my silent rebuilds, no, we needed Mastodon. If I go look at the build, can you simply do the following for a YAML list without the surrounding quotes? I could try, but I think it's going to fail because GitHub Action inputs only accept text, a string. So if that doesn't come through as a string, it'll fail. But I could try it. The linter automatically runs in my editor, so it should warn me if that's not going to be valid. GitHub Actions, I think. Okay, so the Docker meta in the first job is going to have to change. I had this problem the first time I tried this. So the Docker meta doesn't need flavors or tags. And this, let's see, platforms, context file, target builder. They don't have builder in cache from, cache to, tags, labels. Okay, that should work. Basically, since you're building the image first, before you're building the metadata that's going to wrap it, the steps have to change order a little bit so that we don't give the Docker meta task in the build stage before the meta stage. If we're going to call them that, build stage. The build stage and meta stage. The build stage, we just really need to focus on building the image and not building up all the metadata yet. So we don't need as much. What will happen is I'll get an error on the Docker build for the actual image part because it'll say there's some inputs you've specified that don't belong in this type of build. And then later, we do the Docker meta. We need images and tags. Yeah, because we're just, and flavors. So flavors help with tags. So, yeah. All right. Let's just try this puppy. All right. So this call local Docker build. So when you build reusable GitHub Actions, pro tip. When you make GitHub Actions, you should have, rather than thinking, like you're going to have linting. Like you should have linting, and linting should check your GitHub Actions before you merge the PR. But another thing that you can do is, for example, builds like GitHub Actions like this. If it's a reusable action doesn't run in that repo. So there's no way to really run or to test a reusable action in and of itself. You need another workflow that calls it in order to test it, to run it to see if it'll work. And if you try to coordinate that across repo, because that's normally how reusable workflows are run, is they're run from some other repo. That sounds very painful and tedious in terms of keeping them in sync when you're trying to test. So the way I test is I always call the local workflow from another workflow when I build it inside of this reusable repo. So if you look here, you saw that workflows call. So I call it call local, meaning I'm not calling a remote one, I'm calling a local reusable build. Oops. So if you look in here, this only runs one job and it calls it from a file path. And the file path is basically the root of the repo, because everything in GitHub Actions runs from the root of the repo by default. So it's going to go find that and run it. And that works. You can call one workflow from another workflow inside the same repo. And so I do this very simple so that it's a smoke test. It runs the reusable workflow on a sample Docker file. So if I'm doing Terraform or any other kind of thing, like there's a lot where you can make sure that in that repo you're testing the workflow itself. For reusable workflows, this is a very unique problem, the reusable workflows. And so I never want to have to depend on some other repo to test whether this repo works. That's maybe a bonus. Maybe you can have like a sample or maybe a reusable -test repo, and maybe this one during its PR, it could technically go to that other repo, do a workflow call to start that workflow remotely, so that you can validate that this will work. Because there's a couple of permission issues with reusable workflows. You need to go into your repo settings and make sure that this repo is allowed to be called remotely. So you got to do that over here. This is actually a pretty new setting. This is only, I think, a couple years old. But if you go over to settings and you go into actions, Allow GitHub Actions to create. Oh, that's not it. That's not it. Oh no, where's the setting? Maybe it's only in orgs. There's a setting somewhere I thought that said allow this repo's workflows to be called from other ones. Maybe, you know what? It's a private setting. If it's a private repo in your organization, which most of them are, under Actions, I'm pretty confident in this, at the bottom you will have a new setting. And that setting will say allow this repo to be called from other repos, because cross repo permissions is a very special thing in GitHub, and it's not on by default in almost all cases. So if you're a private organization, you have private repos. You have to do extra things to get one repo to be able to reach another one. Ideally, you don't want to do a pat, right? You don't want to create a user's pat just so that one repo can talk to another. That's fragile. We don't really want that. So anyway, that's how this all works. So, and we're going to call this, well, we're just going to call this a init because this is the first, we know what the branch is called. So let's jump over to the actions and see what we broke. Ooh, yeah, Conrad. So yes, indeed, my Lisp, I think that's what that is telling me, no, that's an incorrect type. It can only be a string, a number, or a true false. Pretty cool. So yeah, so we have to have it as a string. Rant. Oh, maybe the Docker builds. Oh, I'm in the wrong repo. Go over here. I need a pull request. Let's make that. All my stuff. Change Docker build to now, if you wanted to make like this really fancy one, you could probably get it to where you choose QEMU or native inside the inputs, and then different things in the workflows happen. Like you can have different steps happen based on an input. So you can skip steps. So you can like skip step setting up QEMU. You can change like you could probably do that. And maybe that's like a stretch goal of this is like support QEMU when you need ARM v7, i386, mainframe, whatever. Or, there was another one in there somewhere. Or just use the native 2 platforms or a single native platform. Like we could probably do that, but that's not my main goal. My main goal was that this is meant for production. This is meant for businesses. Probably don't need v7 in most cases. So use Docker's docs for native multi-platform builds. I probably could just have AI fill this out. Use Docker's docs for native multi-platform builds rather than slower QEMU emulation that this repo has been using for 3+ years. GitHub now has ARM 64 runners. Has Linux ARM 64. What am I doing? I can never reach the tilde without looking. Has runners. A matrix style job to split out the builds. Then merge the metadata together. Okay, and we need the Docker docs on this, and that is Docker multi-platform GitHub action. Distribute across, yeah, here we go. Distributed build across multiple runners. That's what I want. That's going to go in here. This is so riveting content for you to watch me making a PR. PR, yep. Now it's going to run. We want to watch the Docker build. Okay. So it's launching two runners. Ooh, one failed. That one's probably going to fail. Yeah. Let's see what failed. BuildX failed. Failed to build. Failed to solve. Failed to push. Docker build workflow. Can't push tag ref by digest. Right. I think this is the exact same error that I was trying to prevent that I had caused last time. Oh, yes. Okay. Okay. So in the reusable build, when we first try to push the image, yeah, because it never got past the first build. So when it is in the push step, we need to remove so tags, labels, platforms, context, file, target, builder, cache, tags, labels. Okay, so this is okay. So I think Docker meta. tags. Oh. No. All right, I'm a little confused. Gramble Tops. I had needed some advice. I'm studying in cloud and cybersecurity and specializing in cloud automation and defense. Today in an interview for an internship, it covered things from Windows servers to Docker to K8s to IAC and more. I could answer everything they asked, but not as specifically as they wanted, which resulted in I did not get a no that I couldn't get the internship and I don't get how I should handle the facts. So the question is, should knowledge go wide or deep for students? That is a great question. It entirely depends on the expectations of the job. That seems like a ridiculous amount of knowledge that you need to know for an internship. That's just me. But you're not learning all that in college and university. So internship, even if it's a paid internship, I would expect them to think maybe you would know one or two of those things, maybe a little. But I mean, I don't think all internships are like that. Like, there's not a lot of people that I know that are professional DevOps engineers or security or cloud engineers that know Kubernetes and Windows and infrastructure as code. Because Windows seems like a random thing. Like that's, Windows is single digits of the web. Like the cloud is Linux. Even Azure, the most Windows cloud in the world that I'm aware of, is a majority Linux. It's over 50% Linux nodes. So them expecting you to know all that stuff, maybe they were just fishing for what knowledge you had and didn't, but doesn't mean just because you're getting asked questions doesn't mean that you were expected to know all that stuff. I don't think. Internships are, to me, before you have the expertise, but when you have the desire and the interest, and you show that you're trying to learn, but you're pretty new. If you were skilled in all this, you could get a paying job. You're trying to get an internship, which implies you don't have these skills yet. So I feel like that's kind of weird. To be honest, though, I've never applied for a security job. I mean, I've always been an operations engineer or a DevOps engineer, or when I've been paid to do jobs, it's usually around data centers and cloud and operations and building and testing software. So security is a native part of that. I've had security clearances. I've had security certificates before. I've gotten SANS certificates on security and stuff like that. So I've done lots of security stuff in my career, but I wouldn't say that necessarily I've went and got a security job. So maybe that's a different world. I don't know. I doubt it. It feels like you just had a bad experience. It doesn't mean that other internship interviews would go that way. But I wish you all the best of luck. I absolutely do not think an internship's knowledge should be going deep. That's the reason there's an internship, is because your knowledge doesn't go deep. So yeah, it sounds like a bad thing. Yeah, that sounds more like a full-time job. Exactly. Like if I could get someone who knew security and cloud and infrastructure as code and Kubernetes and Windows, that would be someone I'd hire and pay them well. So that seems like an unrealistic expectation, especially if you're in the security realm, because security, obviously you have to know the things you're trying to secure. But to me, a security intern would be someone who's learned more about how, what is a vulnerability? How does networking work in a basic way? Like, to give me explanations of TCP/IP and ports. Like, give me the very basic fundamentals. I would not expect you to know and have experience in infrastructure as code as a security intern. I could probably go find you 10 security engineers right now that I maybe know that don't know how to run Kubernetes and don't know how to build infrastructure as code, because that's not generally their job. Their job is to do audits and to set up, pen testing and scanners and logging and monitoring systems that do all the hard work and bring alerts up to the security teams so they can be aware of changes or threats in their environment. Like, specialized high-end engineers that are doing security teams, red team, blue team, whatever. They might have there's maybe one engineer that specializes in containers and Kubernetes, and another engineer on the team that specializes in cloud APIs, and you're not going to get one that knows it all, for sure. Yeah. Oh, a platform engineering internship. I mean, do you not have any experience in tech at all? Because I wouldn't suggest someone get their very first job as a platform engineer. That's like when people ask me, can I go straight out of university into a DevOps job? Generally, no. These are jobs that are meant for the people that already know how to program, know how computers in the cloud works, and then go and get those jobs that are, 101 developer job, or a team that's maybe needs a basic scripter that knows how to automate and knows maybe one tool, maybe one knows Terraform and how to spin up things in the cloud. And that's a person who would be a very junior or intern level for operations or software development. And then from those people that already have those jobs, I'd be looking to make them platform engineers or DevOps engineers. I've never seen or never looked for a platform engineering internship. That seems like a very tall, complicated expectation, because in order to be a platform engineer, you generally are expected to know how to read programs, and especially probably how to write them. You need to know dozens and dozens of tools, and you need to understand the cloud as well as Kubernetes, as well as developer team needs, because a platform engineering person's customer is the developers. That's one of your main customers. You might interface with actual users, but your developers, which means you have to know what it's like to be a developer. So I would say in general, that sounds like a really hard job to get an internship for. So good on you for going big. But maybe if you've tried getting these internships multiple times and they're not working out, maybe you need to go looking for getting just a development job or someone related to the development workflow somehow, and then move from there into DevOps engineering or platform engineering. Just a suggestion, if it turns out to be too hard to go straight into platform engineering. So this bug, tags. env registry image. Tag rules. So there's something wrong right here. There's something I'm giving it, and it's not liking it. Image names. True, false, platforms. Input image names. Maybe let's try this. Let me review the error. Hopefully that helped. by the way. Grandpa Tops. Failed to push. Yeah, I can't push tagged ref. By digest. And then if I look, tag. So those aren't tag rules versus image names. I think that's what I want. Yeah. All right, let's try again. Oh, repository must be lowercase. Yes. And that doesn't pass in. So I can't use. Oh, right. Image name. So GitHub repository. Yeah, this is a problem that is easy to solve because it's just a casing issue, but because I'm using inputs, I'm going to cheat for now. Oops. So all I'm doing is I'm changing the environment variable. This is a problem with Docker. So Docker images cannot have names with camel case in them or uppercase. So they all have to be lowercase. And for some reason, the builder just fails. It doesn't have a built-in string translator to lowercase. It just fails and says, sorry, you got to give me a lowercase string. But the environment variables for GitHub pass in a string that is a camel case for my account, because my account on GitHub, as you can see in the top left, has a capital B and a capital F. So that's a unique problem to Docker build. Normally how you would do this is you would take the inputs and that you would send them through a parser that would, and that's what I actually do, but that only works. Actually, that's not true. For now, I can do it this way. The true fix is I actually have it already in there. I just need to account for multiple steps all using an environment variable rather than an input. So the input needs to go through an environment variable, and that environment variable then would run twice, and then it would output. Yeah, so if you look, let me get this just started. Bret Fisher, Docker build workflow, that's the tag. So we're going to let that run while I work on a permanent fix. The permanent fix here is up here. Well, we leave the input as is, and then down here I got a feeling this output is not necessary, but this is what happens right here. So the GitHub repository is added to a variable. Oh, sorry. It's added to a variable. So I do this prepare step where I take the platform list, I add it to a platform variable from inputs. Well, it's actually from just GitHub's. And then I pass that in as an environment variable called platform pair. I don't know why it's called that. Is it always going to be a pair? But I take the GitHub repository, I turn that into an image, then I call it. Okay, so this could change to input. I could use image names. Like this. Image names. And then here, I'm echoing that, and then that's going to go as registry name, registry image, and then down here, it would be the environment variable. So it'd be like this. I think. That's assuming this builds correctly. Let's go check the build. Yeah, no, Docker build doesn't work again. So 2 jobs, failed. Oh, right. Okay. Next, so we solved that error. Next error, no files. So we try to upload something that doesn't exist. Okay. Oh. Okay. So build image steps. This is builds image. Okay. So yeah. Try again. See, this is one of the challenges. So all I did was I changed an environment variable. Essentially, one of the outputs was named incorrectly because in this job I call this build image, not build. So yeah. Well, okay. What's up in the chat? So what my school is selling won't work. Then goal at the end that you can assist develop a platform engineering at the end of this year. I am on my 3-year bachelor degree in Europe, and what you mentioned on how to code, understand the things are things that we learned to get an analysis since first year is your. It did help since I was looking at the internship list of my school provided the platform engineering with it. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, like don't take what I'm saying as fact. Like that is just that is just my take on things. It doesn't mean that that's going to be. Sorry, I'm turning up the opacity on those messages so that when I can see, yeah, so that looks better. Yeah, don't take what I'm saying as gospel. I'm just saying I'm not an expert in platform engineering jobs. I've never interviewed for a platform engineering job. I've been doing platform engineering tasking for 20 years, but we never really called it that until the last 3 years. We didn't call it platform engineering. We just called it operations or systems management, or it was just a normal thing we were doing to help developers. But the industry has now taken a lot of these ideas and turned it into this thing that we call platform engineering, which just means building out the infrastructure for your devs in a way that they can use it as a platform like they would a cloud. And you basically are building like your own private cloud with web interfaces and APIs, and allow the developers to help utilize all that. So we were already doing all that before. It's just now a name. And I don't disagree with that. It's a good idea to name things and have good names that everybody agrees on. But I have friends that have been in tech for a long time and couldn't get a platform engineering job. It's a complicated job. So if your school is telling you can do that and that they will train you to do that, then great, good for you. Like you should keep trying if that's their focus. I'm not saying they can't teach you. I'm just saying that's a pretty hard internship probably to get. Like you might be reaching, but if you've got skills, if you've got experience with all that programming stuff like I talked about, then maybe. I've never interviewed, so I should probably just shut up and defer to you finding someone who's actually interviewed for platform engineering jobs or who knows about platform engineering internships, because I've never seen one. I've never had one. So, all right, I think that's going to fix it. I think, yeah. We got a green build. 2 jobs completed. Yes. Okay. So we built and pushed, and then we pushed the manifest. And then, is there a comment? Oh boy. I've got Codex in here doing its thing. Okay, so those are blank. So yeah, so that's something I gotta fix. But if we go into the actions, into that, in theory, so it built this image. It built that image and then uploaded these artifacts, and then pull 133. So then if we go into packages, we should be able to see this as a new image. Yeah, so this image right here. Yeah, so this is the image. It pushed it. So then the trick is Yeah, see all these things were pushed. And it's not going to go, we're not going to go latest because that only happens when I merge the PR. So over here, this is this. So I essentially need to change the final merge workflow. And find inputs comment enabled, comment ID. So body, okay, steps, Docker meta, output tags, output labels. So, that's called meta, and this one is called Docker meta. Aha. Runner temp. Oh, and this also needs to be fixed. Okay. I can't actually believe that worked. That tells me something else is broken. So the prepare step. Need to fix that down here too. And then images, I probably should use the same thing I'm doing up here. I'm a little confused. So, okay. That's just printing. Yeah, this is a little janky. There's some non-ideal edge cases I think I'm seeing here, but I think this is mostly going to work. Docker meta output tags. So let's do one more try. See if we can't get that metadata to work. So ideally, when this finishes, the PR will be updated with a comment of the image tags and the image data that we used. So yeah, it's rare. I mean, platform engineering is a pretty small portion of all of the developers and DevOps people out there. Like that is one of the newest. That SRE before it, those are like the two new types of jobs. SRE's been around, at Google over a decade, but most companies that are large enterprises are trying to establish that role, if it's not already. Platform engineering is even newer than that. So we didn't even use the term platform engineering 4 years ago, I feel like. Maybe there was a few companies trying to make it a thing 5 years ago, but it's a pretty new work style and a new job focus. So, okay, so we broke that. Invalid reference format. Okay, so that edge case thing was not an edge case. We are We are on the Docker Buildix image tools inspect. Steps. Oh. Docker meta. Didn't see that. Oopsie. Too bad it's not, the linter isn't smart enough to detect that. All right. This is it. This is the last one. And I've got to run. So this has been a great live stream. Not terribly exciting. Hopefully you got something out of the beginning where I explained how this works with GitHub Actions. And when this is all done, I'm going to merge this PR and then update my README and some of the templating stuff so that, at least for now, we're going to have two options. One is emulated, one is, and you know, you can choose in my templates which one. The ARM build takes almost 8 seconds longer. Come on, baby. Nice. All right, go back to our PR. And if that worked, yes. Okay. In the PR, what I expect to see is this. This is using a couple of actions at the end of the job, that final job. It pulls out some of the metadata and puts it as a comment in the PR so that anyone who's building this can see, oh, if I just want to run this locally, I can run the PR, like basically the latest build in this PR, because technically this has been, every time I build it, I'm reusing this tag. So this is a tag that changes over time. This changes each run. So each time I run this is unique. So if you wanted to be certain, so I give both. If you want to be certain that you're using this particular action runs image versus the latest image from this PR. And if someone else, if I push later, this image, this PR 133 image would change. Now, when I merge it, it will get the latest tag. It'll get other tags as well, but these are just during the PR phase. So, yeah, Conrad enjoyed it because, yeah, I'm to the conclusion, the final conclusion of getting this working, and it's fast. So I'm trying to think. I think we did this on Mastodon because Mastodon on when we were building it, Mastodon on Intel or AMD 64 took less than 5 minutes to build. I think it was like 3 minutes to build. But if you built it on QEMU ARM, it took 45 minutes. And that's a Ruby project. So I don't know. I mean, it runs some NPM stuff. I don't know what actual steps took forever. But we needed to, and once we did native, it was less than 5 minutes, I think. I'm pretty sure. In fact, we can go check. Mastodon, actions, Docker builds. Okay, it only took 18 minutes, not 8, I think. Yeah, so it took 10 minutes longer for ARM, which is really unusual. I don't know what's the deal with what's up with their ARM runners. Like usually ARM is faster, so maybe their ARM runners are just not as powerful CPUs, or you don't get as many of the powerful CPUs. I looked it up once. I know ARM 64 runner. I know they have somewhere the spec of exactly what's in them. So, and then the last thing was, did we, okay, so QEMU is disabled. So we can take that out. All right, so I'm going to go update some documentation and readmes and all that stuff. I will be here maybe next week. Okay, so 2 weeks. In 2 weeks is KubeCon, so I may not make next week's live stream. You'll just have to like and subscribe here. Click the bell so that you get notified when I go live stream. I probably will live stream next Thursday, maybe not. Depends on how behind we are in packing, and we're going to drive to KubeCon. So join us then. 2 weeks from now, we're going to be at KubeCon. We're going to be recording podcast. I'm not going to live stream from KubeCon. I haven't done that in a year or two. It's easier. Not a lot of people watch the live stream from there, so we just make content while we're there, edit it up, ship it when we get back. So welcome to my channel if you just showed up. I'll see you next week on the live stream, hopefully with a friend. All right. Ciao, everybody.